been my project nigh on to 2 years at this point. Starting innocently, starting with, I know, I'll look up where all the Revolutionary War veterans are buried. Thinking, how many could there be? A couple dozen? There's, at last count, confirmed, there's more than 120. Not confirmed, we've still got another 100 beyond that. I have personally stood in front of 43 Revolutionary War veterans' graves to enter them into Ohio's project. And some of those graves are in beautiful places, and some of those graves, not so much. I had to have a guide because I have never ever found it otherwise. I mean, you literally go back behind the barn, down the hill, across the creek, up the hill, through the woods, and if you didn't know there was a graveyard up there, you'd have never found the graveyard. I have one funny thing. I knew where the grave was by the description. You go to this address, you go down the lane, it's a quarter mile. Before you hit the river, the creek, the waterway of some description, it'll be on the left. And so I pulled up guy's driveway. He's sitting out on the porch with his dog. And I told him my mission, and he goes, well, you can't do that now. And I went, well, I need to do that now. And so every time I would come back, he'd say, well, there's cougars back there. No, he called them mountain lions. There's mountain lions back there. And so help me, I'm going, cool. I want to see the mountain lion. He goes, okay, well, there's timber wolves back there. There's a timber wolf I have seen in front of my car. His head is this big. There's timber wolves back there. And I'm like, better? So when that didn't work, he said, those big guys in the woods, yeah, there's a Sasquatch back there. Because I've seen the Sasquatch. He was in the road. He was 12 foot tall. And I thought, this guy's growing something back there. And he does not want me to see it. Because he was just escalating. So that's what I've been doing for a couple of years. Anyway, the Revolutionary War was won by thousands of ordinary soldiers. Over 250,000 American men served in the armed forces that won our independence. Approximately 100,000 of them served in the Continental Army, and maybe double that number in state militias, which were an all-volunteer army of citizens. All of these men risked their lives. About 7,000 were killed. At least 17,000 soldiers died of disease or in accidents. As many as 25,000 men were disabled by disease, wounds, or injuries sustained in the service. Those who survived the war became America's first veterans, the world's first veterans of an army of free men. After the war, Clermont County counted these men as our first settlers. The American 250 Committee of Clermont County thinks that 2026 is a good year to recognize, learn about, and honor these heroes. To that end, Paige Craig, Carrie Estes of the Clermont County Genealogical Society, and myself with the Clermont County Historical Society have been tracking down these Revolutionary War patriots. With unbelievable amounts of research, we hope to accomplish a solid record of verified Revolutionary War patriots that lived in Clermont County and the locations of as many of their graves as possible to find after 200 be available to descendants and researchers for all time. So on that note, I have gotten these veterans, and you dig for records, and you can find when they came in for their pension applications, they told you what they did. They said it for the records. That's how they got their pension. You can find what they did, which has been fascinating to me. And the next one's more fascinating. And eventually I feel like I am living with 250 guys in my house because we're all neighbors at this point. So William Sly was in the 7th Regiment of the Maryland Line. The 7th Maryland, while William Sly was active in the war, saw fierce action in both the Battle of Monmouth, a grueling contest in sweltering heat that demonstrated the Continental Army's growing effectiveness, and the disastrous Battle of Camden. On April 30th, 1778, William Sly enlisted in the 7th Regiment of the Maryland Line under Captain Coates Jones, Colonel Gamby, General Smallwood. He joined with the 7th Regiment at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, marched off immediately under the command of General Washington. He was in the Battle of Monmouth late June, marched to White Plains, New York, then to winter quarters in Bonbrook, New Jersey. In the spring, he marched back into New York near West Point. They built forts in the summer of '78. They marched back to Morristown, New Jersey for winter quarters. The reason I know all of this is because Mr. William Sly, after moving into Clermont County, wanted the pension he was entitled to for service to our country during the Revolutionary War. He needed it to live. Like hundreds of other veterans who had settled in or near Clermont County, he had to come into the county seat of Batavia to apply for his pension. In order to qualify for this pension, each veteran had to face a judge, be sworn in, and prove a half a century after the fact that he gave qualifying service to our country during the Revolutionary War. The veteran had to relay dates of enlistment, names of officers, battles fought, find witnesses who could vouch for his service, or if that wasn't possible, at least swear he was an honest man. If he left a widow, she had to prove she was married to a Revolutionary War veteran before the end of the war in 1783 to be eligible for a widow's pension. All of this information, all of this testimony was written down by hand. What did I do? That should be there. In the books of pension applications. And by the way, Clermont County's clerk of courts has miserable handwriting. It's a struggle. And there's probably facts wrong because we couldn't read them, but more on the pension laws lately. Clermont County was extremely lucky to have never had courthouse burned down or flood, so these journals have survived for a couple of centuries. Eileen Witt, she's one of my heroes, took on the task of going through these handwritten volumes that hold the actual words of the military men who fought to create this country, who then came to Clermont County and worked to build a home for themselves and their family in the wilderness here. Ms. Witt patiently and doggedly transcribed these handwritten pension applications into 3 volumes of records that are now available to read right around the corner, Batavia Branch Library. These 3 volumes are a part of the multiple sources we dug into to verify Revolutionary War service and then find every veteran's grave that is findable so that we can celebrate these individuals during America's 250th. But first, more of William Sly's story. In a letter dated January 27, 1826, starts, "Dear General, you say that if I'm needy, I can get $8 a month. I was long since informed of this, but I understood that it was next to impossible for me to procure the necessary vouchers in order to obtain it. I can assure you that I am needy, being such as I am 67 years of age, having lost one leg and much crippled in the other, unable to earn anything by labor and having but a small stock of property. If you can point out to me what steps I can take in order to obtain these additional funds, I shall ever be grateful to you for your kindness." And that's his note, and that's his signature. I thought that was just cooler than heck to find. "I therefore entrust my cause to your hands, and pray that kind Providence may favor you with every desirable blessing. Subscribe myself, your most obedient servant, William Sly." This just kills me. He is politely and sweetly begging for help to obtain funds to survive after having lost a leg in the war for his country's freedom. The story of William Sly's service that started this article is continued here. In the spring of 1780, he marched to the Elk River on the Chesapeake Bay, landing at Petersburg under the command of General Gates. He was promoted to corporal in August 1780. From Petersburg, they marched to near Camden, South Carolina, where the American army was defeated horribly by the Englishman Cornwallis, and where William Sly was badly wounded in the right leg, taken prisoner, taken to Charleston, where his leg was amputated, for which he received a pension as an invalid. In April 1781, he was exchanged, then he was discharged. William Sly's story is one of many. Luckily, we know where Mr. Sly's final resting place is, in the Felicity Oddfellows Cemetery. Other Revolutionary War veterans are buried in large cemeteries, lovingly cared for, forgotten cemeteries covered in trees, weeds, and vines, and every kind of burial ground in between. Our mission is to prove all their service. My mission is to find their grave. Paige, Carey, and I have been researching, have been digging through records, comparing notes. We have noted many errors in previous research. Carefully, we have documented the service of these individuals. This is a project where we will probably never be able to say, that's it, that's all of them, close the books. The research continues. I know Carrie's got a backlog at this point of 20 that really could be. Mr. Sly's story. He did eventually qualify for his $8 a month pension. On June 29th, 1842, the pension agent was notified to pay arrears dating back to March 1831 when he first qualified for the $8 per month instead of $6. The $580 had to be divided up between his 5 children as he died January 27th, 1838. The government. Pension laws. These changed over time. First, there was none unless you had your leg shot off. That's the Act of 1776. The Act of 1818 was the first federal law to grant pensions based on service rather than injury. It provided lifetime pensions to between $8 and $20 a month to the national soldiers, to the Continental Line soldiers. If you were in the militia, which more militiamen than the other, you were not included in this pension at this point. In 1820, the country was deluged with veterans who qualified for that first money in 1818. So they changed the law. Due to overwhelming financial strain, this amendment forced existing pensioners to reapply, required veterans to formally prove their financial destitution. The Act of 1832, this sweeping act eliminated the requirement of poverty, allowing surviving officers and enlisted men, including militia, by 1832, who served at least 6 months in either the Continental Army or the state militias. By 1836, they decided that they would include the widows, but the widow had to prove she was married to the veteran before the end of the war. They have come here from Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, normally by way of Kentucky, sometimes by way of then to Cincinnati and then out to Clermont County. And did they bring their marriage license with them if they had a marriage license in the first place? They were tough on the widows. There's many times the widows were denied. So, John C. Smith, private, 1st Regiment, Massachusetts. On August 8, 1832, Mr. John C. Smith came to Batavia Common Pleas Court in order to obtain a pension. And he had a lot to say. J.D. Morris, the clerk, who I cursed many times, filled 12 pages of role in the battles he was involved in. He relayed many details, what part of the battle he was in, who was his captains, his lieutenants, his corporals, and his generals, where he marched from, where he marched to, when he ran, and who was firing at him on the way. John testifies. John Smith first entered the service of the United States in December 1776 in the militia of Massachusetts, serving under Captain Nathan Rowley and General Schuyler. The next year, they marched to the area of Ticonderoga, a fort that the British had just taken from the Americans on July 5th, 1777. On picket guard duty, yeah, okay, you should have read that before. I'm sorry. I got big X's here so I know when to hit the buttons. It's a good thing you love me. So that's up a hill looking at the now remodeled Fort Ticonderoga. On picket guard duty, he and others were taken to the top of a hill where he could look down and see the British in the fort. Somehow the British discovered them and started firing. They ran. They ran about 1.5 miles with the British firing at them the whole time. They ran through the woods until they came on to about 250 American militiamen who had been sent to keep an eye on the British. So his small band joined the larger group. In about 2 hours, the British advanced toward them. The militia fired on the British fired back. Some Americans were killed, including the colonel. They all retreated to the town of Bennington in Vermont, where they joined up with General John Stark. On August 16th, 1777, so we're going just by weeks at this point, John Smith was under the command of General John Stark in the Battle of Bennington. An American force of 2,000 men, primarily New Hampshire, Massachusetts militiamen, reinforced by Vermont militiamen and the Green Mountain Boys, decisively defeated a detachment of British General John Burgoyne's army, led by the Hessian Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Baum. Baum led 800 men, Hessians, Brits, and Loyalists with some Iroquois. Burgoyne had sent them south to raid Bennington for horses, draft animals, food, supplies, all the things that the British Army was running out of due to being cut off from their supply lines by the Americans. Baum had no idea that his 800 people were walking into an enemy 2,000 strong. The fighting was desperate and heavy. General Stark later claimed it was the hottest engagement I have ever witnessed. A German veteran of the battle wrote, "For a few seconds, the scene which ensued defies all power of language. The bayonet, the butt of the rifle, the saber, the pike were in full play as men fell, as they rarely fall in modern war, under direct blows of their enemies. The Americans were victorious. Lieutenant Colonel Baum's entire army was killed or captured. British General Burgoyne realized he had not only lost 800 men, but now the supply shortage that he'd been suffering was far worse. I'm not beeping. There's a car out there. John Smith and a large number of militia volunteers now marched 2 days to Saratoga, which set the stage for the battles of Saratoga, New York. The British strategy, General Burgoyne aimed to march south from Canada through the Hudson River Valley, isolating New England from the rest of the colonies and crushing the rebellion. He had big plans. The first battle is the Battle of Freeman's Farm, right? I got that right. Though technically a British tactical victory, the British took heavy casualties and were unable to break through the Continental lines. The second battle, Bemis Heights, 2-3 weeks later, running low on supplies and outnumbered, British General Burgoyne attacked again. Aggressive leadership by America's General Benedict Arnold, there's a familiar name, and Daniel Morgan's sharpshooters shattered the British lines, forcing a retreat. On October 17, 1777, General Burgoyne surrendered his entire army of 6,222 men. This was the first British army to surrender in world history and marked a major turning point in the Revolutionary War. Still serving under the command of General John Stark, our John Smith felt, in his words, that he helped defeat the British. His testimony continues that John Smith's testimony continues that as soon as the battle was over, he and a considerable number of volunteers marched to White Plains, and in November 1777 enlisted in the 1st Massachusetts Regiment on the Continental Line under Captain Hunt and General Joseph Vose. This American victory, after many defeats and near escapes, finally convinced the French that America, total underdogs to the mighty British military, actually could win the war against the British, which was France's enemy. In the classic, the enemy of my enemy is my friend move, France decided to join an alliance with the Americans. Which brings us to the Battle of Monmouth. What starts as a minor action, we're talking June 28, 1778 now, it starts as a minor action, quickly turns into the most savage, knockdown battle of the entire war. It is almost an American defeat until General Washington himself arrives on the field and takes command. Fought in murderous June heat, this was the largest land battle of the war. Men on both sides fell from heat as fast as they did musket and cannonballs. Our John Smith was wounded when a bayonet was run through his left hand clear to the joint of his wrist. The two sides fought the whole day, pausing in late afternoon from heat and exhaustion. The Americans prepared to start fighting back up again at daybreak, but when morning came and they looked out, the British were gone. The Patriots held the field. It sort of counts as a win. John Smith's pension app goes on for several more barely legible pages. John was at Yorktown when British Lord Cornwallis surrendered October 19, 1781, and peace was proclaimed. Private John C. Smith had helped defeat the British. He is buried in the little cemetery behind what was Mount Holly Congregational Christian Chapel. The church is now known as the Trinity Holiness Church of God and is on State Route 125 in Hamlet. Next feller, Edward Kennan, drummer. Records show that Edward Kennan was born in 1763. As we are trying to confirm a man's service in the Revolutionary War, that year raises a red flag as to whether one so young could have actually entered service. We found proof that Edward Kennan did. As a drummer for his unit, he was so small, his drum dragged the ground. To march with this drum, another had to carry it for him to beat it. In his 1832 pension app, Edward Kennan says that he volunteered to join the service of the United States of in Upper Freehold, New Jersey, even before the Declaration of Independence was signed. He was a small boy, he says, not more than 13. Initially, he served under Gilbert Giberson and Lieutenant William Perius. Once the Declaration of Independence was signed, both Captain Giberson and Lieutenant Perius went over to the British, necessitating some new officers. Now he was to serve under Captain John Conover and Colonel Elisha Lawrence, along with 60 to 70 men under arms in the company. They were told to stay ready so that they could move out at a moment's notice when called. He remembers he was called out twice in 1 week to keep the Tories from getting the cattle and hogs. This is important. You don't want the Tories to eat well, and you want your folks to do so. So they were frequently called out during the war, as the Tories were very numerous and troublesome. When the companies were called out to Monmouth, his company would guard the eastern shore of New Jersey. In his words, he said he stayed with the same company from the time before the Declaration was signed to after peace. By 1780, neither the Tories nor the British gave much trouble, and in the winter, they all went home because there wasn't much of anything to do. After peace, they were discharged, although he received no discharge in writing. This is also really typical. He came to Ohio 28 years before applying for the pension and does not remember when he came to Clermont County, although we found his name on an 1806 tax list. His pension application was rejected. He had not served enough months in military capacity, which leads you to see somebody up there counting, well, he was 5 days here and 14 days here, and they didn't total up 6 months, so his pension was rejected. And he's buried on my street. He's buried in the old Moore Cemetery, overlooking the East Fork. I had the dangest time finding his grave. So we're to Private John Miles, Wicked Jack, 10th Virginia Regiment. In 1777, John Miles enlisted as a private in the 10th Virginia Regiment and the Virginia Continental Line in the company commanded by Captain Thomas Blackwell under the command of Colonel John Greene. He served 3 years in the, his words, Army of the Revolutionary War against the common enemy. In September of 1777, he fought with his regiment in the Battle of Brandywine under the command of Colonel Greene. John Miles, in his pension application, states, I was wounded in the left shoulder with a musket ball, which was extracted. At the same time, I was wounded by buckshot, which yet remains in my arm. The Battle of Brandywine was a massive 11-hour engagement where British General William Howe outmaneuvered George Washington, forcing a chaotic American retreat. Both sides put about 15,000 soldiers into the fight. The Americans lost about 1,300 killed or wounded. Ultimately, this allowed the British to go on to capture the colonial capital of Philadelphia a few weeks later. At the Battle of Monmouth in the summer of 1778, John Miles related Colonel Green was killed by the enemy at the Battle of Monmouth, and I was not 15 feet from him when he fell. And my Captain Blackwell was killed, I believe, shortly after Colonel Green fell. Good news here is that Colonel Green survived. He was wounded and he fell and was trampled by the Patriot Army's retreat, but he did live to fight another day. John Miles was discharged in 1780 at Valley Forge. On the same day, he re-enlisted to serve under Captain John Gillison. Due to his arm injury, using a gun was difficult. He was assigned to drive the baggage wagon. Whoops, I did that too soon. You can't look at that yet. He was in Clermont County by 1818 when he made his first pension application, living in Withamsville. He was accepted for pension in 1818, but due to the law change, he had to go back in 1820, apply again, and prove he was indigent. So he made a list of everything he owned. He had a bed, 5 split-bottom chairs, 6 plates, 6 knives and forks. He had hand saws, chisels. He had a plow and traces, and he didn't have any land, and he didn't have any horses. But that's everything the man owned in 1820. It is said about him that he was an eccentric man. He said when he died, he wanted a bottle of whiskey and a plug of tobacco placed in his coffin. In the Army, he was referred to in writing several times as Wicked Jack. His brother-in-law said that was on account of his foul mouth. He died January 8, 1834, and is buried in Mount Moriah Cemetery, although no stone has ever been found. I think that has to do with his poverty. Nobody paid the stonemason. Another one of my favorite guys, Jesse Justice, 2nd New Jersey Regiment. He was just 15 when he joined Captain Nathaniel Bowman's 2nd New Jersey as a private in the service of the United States of America for the term of the war. The 2nd was led by Captain Nathaniel Bowman and commanded by Colonel Israel Shreve. The 2nd participated in the brutal Battle of Monmouth by covering the retreat of General Lee's forces, then falling back in reserve for the rest of the battle. On June 7, 1780, the 2nd New Jersey took part in the often overlooked Battle of Connecticut Farms. Early in 1780, the British were hearing reports that the Americans were falling apart, and they thought it would be a great time to go take New Jersey, go straight for George Washington's encampment in Morristown, and win the war. To do this, though, the British had to take Hobart's Gap, the only route through the Watchung Mountains. To do that, they first had to get past the Continental Army and take the small towns of Connecticut Farms and Springfield. To get the party started, the British ferried 6,000 troops out of Staten Island, landing at Elizabethtown in eastern New Jersey. The Americans had spies all about, and they got wind of this. Knowing they were badly outnumbered, they went into the countryside, rallying militia forces, pulling Continental troops back from elsewhere in New Jersey to be ready to meet the British. Instead of being able to walk over the falling apart American troops, the British met stiff resistance, initially pushing the American forces back through the small village of Connecticut Farms, plundering and burning as they went. See that little church? They burned her down. The American forces then turned the British around. The British retreated clear back to Elizabethtown. Colonel Shreve of the 2nd New Jersey wrote, "Action was the warmest has ever happened since this war with our brigade." Then on June 23rd, not long after, the British tried again. First they captured Connecticut Farms, then they captured Springfield Heights, but then they realized the Patriot forces were multiplying all around them and in front of them. They then realized that they were not going to capture Hobart's Gap. Again, the British turned around and at midnight made their way back to Staten Island. The Patriots, with a mix of Continental troops and militia, had stopped the British Army. Jesse Justice of New Jersey, who had rendered good service in the Revolution with the 2nd New Jersey Regiment, went on to purchase a tract of 700 acres in the western part of Tate Township, on which he settled in 1806. He lived there until his death in 1826. The Reverend Jesse Justice preached the gospel while he was here in Clermont County. He was among the early preachers at the Batavia Methodist Episcopal Church. He was also an early provisional preacher at the Old Bethel Methodist Church, where he is now buried. we've just cleaned his grave. We use that magic stuff and clean the tombstone. I go back every week or so to see as it's brightening up. So he's one of the guys.
Is that the D4?
D2.
D2.
Just two.
Yeah.
D2.
Yeah.
Yeah. We cleaned the 3 Revolutionary War veterans that are there at that cemetery. And we had stuff left over, so we got one of them's wife. Getting better all the time. Oh, you can just see the run off. It was kind of amazing. Still, Christopher Hartman, Minuteman, New Jersey militia. Christopher Hartman, born in Germany, emigrated with his parents when he was 2½. When he was 9, his father died. His mother had him bound out to a farmer until he was 21. In his pension app, Christopher Hartman says he was called into the service of the United States in January 1775. Think about that. That's before the war started. That's before the Declaration of Independence was signed. He was one of the first. He was called out as a Minuteman of the militia of New Jersey, although considered unreliable by American military leaders. Militias played a very important role for the Americans in the war. Militias in areas such as New Jersey acted as strike units against the British supply lines and attacked loyalist units. They had lots of enemies. They had the British, they had the Tories, which were the American loyalists. So they had to keep their eyes on lots. Thus, they impacted the logistics of the British Army and played a key role in keeping the Loyalists from playing a larger role in the war. Militias mostly trained on a seasonal basis, but Minuteman companies were established to provide more regular training of the best men in the militia. They are expected to respond quickly to danger at a minute's notice. With his militia unit, they were called to Long Island to disarm Tories, came back to New Jersey with 6 wagon loads of arms. He was out the whole month of January 1775, then went home for a week, and again was called up to Staten Island to keep the Tories from conveying provisions to the British on ships that were lying in the harbor in New York. Again, they went home and they were called back by June to South Amboy, New Jersey to guard the coast. That expedition lasted a month, and then he was back home before harvest. This was Private Hartman's life as a Minuteman in the militia. Generally, they wore their own clothes, they carried their own guns. When the expedition was over, they went home. In 1777, they were called to Monmouth to keep the British from acquiring horses, coming back to New Jersey with 20 horses. In October, they were called up to fight at the Battle of Germantown, but they arrived late and the battle was over. In June 1778, with the British moving on Monmouth, Christopher Hartman, now a sergeant, was called out along with 4 Virginia militias. When a wagon broke down, he was put to mending it. In the meantime, the Battle of Monmouth was being fought while he was fixing the wagon. In his pension app, he states he was engaged from the beginning of the war to the end of the war, a Minuteman the whole time. In December 8th, Williamsburg in Clermont County, and by summer moved to his 621 acres. They're now in Jackson Township on US 50 and Aber Road, where Christopher's grandson, John K. Hartman, built the still standing, still beautiful Hartman log cabin. He's buried a good walk down a path over a creek behind his grandson's cabin up in the Hartman family cemetery, which I love. I am kind of bonkers about cemeteries. So that's him and his wife, and that's the government marker put up probably in the 50s. There was an awful lot of government markers.
And he was my 3rd great-grandfather.
Was he?
Yes.
You and Isella have common ancestors. He has common ancestors with everybody. And she'll tell you, that's my ancestor. Oh, I just found this guy. He was accepted from the get-go. We knew he was a Revolutionary War veteran, so I didn't have to do the research into him. And just recently went, I know some Applegates, and I just looked into his records a little closer. I just got entranced. I'm going through 40 of those handwritten pages. But Zebulon Applegate, born 1755, Middlesex, New Jersey. He died in 1840 in Ohio Township, Clermont County. In 1833, 78 years old, Zebulon Applegate, you gotta love his name, wrote the most amazing first-hand account of his time in the American Revolution. He said when a young man, he was called up when the British took Staten Island. He didn't know the date. He'll tell you all 40-something pages. He doesn't know the date. But history books say it occurred in July 1776, or as he put it, as a young man, I was called up to take arms with the militia and turn out and defend my country. At first, he was with the New Jersey militia, but as needs changed, his company would be drafted by other companies. In that way, Applegate found himself in Philadelphia, where they were making up a company to man 2 pieces of artillery under Captain Joseph Mulder. Zebulon volunteered. He didn't have to do this. Some of them, it sounds like they're drafted. When they say they were called out, that sort of doesn't sound all that voluntary, but he volunteered for this one. His notes describe how they marched up near the Delaware River in December. They camped near Mount Holly, then waited for a certain night, quote unquote. He learned they were to cross the river in darkness and at daybreak battle the British. Like, The first time they tried to cross the Delaware, they could not because of the ice. So they marched further up the river to find a crossing. Then he wrote, if I'm not mistaken, this was Christmas Eve. Like, well, damn! Our young militiaman was with George Washington crossing the Delaware. You know, that battle. Depicted in this painting of the army, all in rowboats, with Washington standing and looking nobly out into the distance. Applegate writes this very matter-of-factly, it is just another day on the job. But as a reminder, this episode really went a little like this. By the end of 1776, George Washington and his army were not doing so good. They'd lost major battles, were chased by the British clear across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. His force, threadbare, and in some cases actually shoeless, were reduced to a few thousand unhappy, unpaid troops whose enlistments were set to expire at the end of the year, which was a week away. It was not looking good for our rebellion. There were a number of times during the Revolution where success or failure of the whole shebang was about at even odds, and this was certainly one of those times. Washington's daring plan involved surprising the enemy, who were tucked in for the winter when there wasn't supposed to be any fighting. First, our miserable but brave troops marched in the dark up the river, crossing in boats and ferries, 2,400 men, horses, cannons, cannonballs. It had been snowing, but then it turned into a powerful winter storm. After crossing, they still had a 10-mile march ahead of them through driving snow, and they were behind schedule. They arrived at first light, and yep, it was a surprise. They captured most of the Hessians, the German mercenaries, snagged as much of their supplies and armaments, food and clothing as they could carry, then got everything, including 896 prisoners, back across the river. Not only was this attack a military success, it was a heck of a morale booster. The army that the British thought was all but defeated, and they were kind of right, just destroyed a major enemy garrison. Next, Applegate relates, in his words, quote, the 1st of January, we was making ready for breakfast when 3 alarm guns was fired. They grabbed their guns, or cannons, because they call cannons guns, so I wasn't sure what he grabbed. And they waited to see what was coming. There they stayed, armed, until an hour before dark, when they saw our soldiers retreating, the British and the Hessians after them. This is now known as the Battle of Princeton, which was kind of an accidental meetup. The Americans saw the British and they headed into them to fight, not realizing the British were ready for them. And now the Americans were being routed by a British bayonet charge. I found an article. Author Rand Moranti called it this way. General Mercer was down, bludgeoned and bayoneted. Colonel Haslett was down too, shot through the head. Colonel Shippen Shippen of the Continental Marines had fallen, as had Captain Fleming of Virginia. Captain Neal of the New Jersey Militia Artillery was down. His two-gun battery overrun and turned on the Americans. The previously untested and now panicked militiamen of General Cadwalader's brigade of the Philadelphia Associators were breaking and running. The British relentlessly moved forward and were on the verge of completely routing the American General Nathaniel Greene's column, constituting about half of Washington's entire army, who were strung out marching to Princeton. The Americans' long-shot opportunity to save their revolution was on the brink of being terminated. On the freezing morning of January 3rd, 1777, however, one man was determined to stand his ground, and he was Captain Joseph Mulder. That's the captain for Zebulon Applegate. That's who Zebulon Applegate joined into the artillery with. So Captain Joseph Mulder, who commanded a company of militiamen ranging in age from 17 to 23, who had been recruited from Philadelphia dockyards. His unit had 2 long 4-pounder cannons. As the British advanced, Captain Mulder trained his cannons, loaded with grape shot, and ended the British advance, just as Washington was riding directly onto the field of battle. Captain Mulder and his crew had served with great skill and bravery, in the words of one witness. Their volleys of grape shot had blunted the British advance just in time. Together with Washington's dramatic appearance on the field, Joseph Mulder's actions indisputably can be said to have turned a potential crushing defeat into an inspirational and desperately needed victory. But back to Zebulon Applegate's actual account of the battle. Quote, "Our soldiers were retreating until they come under the cover of our cannon. We fired at the British and dismissed their pursuit." The British had captured a pair of American cannons and were firing back until we gave them a load of grape shot. Then we exchanged shots until dark. Both sides called it quit in the dark. In another really cool tactical move, Washington ordered fires to be built all along the line. Applegate described it. "We was told 12,000 of our enemy was at Trenton. Marching orders were given in the night. We aroused up our fires to make the enemy believe we were all still there. Then we marched all night until daybreak. Then we formed a line with the artillery in the center, small arms to the left and right. We went 300 yards, saw the British run out 2 pieces of artillery, and they fired at us. We returned the compliment. Kept a heavy fire until they retreated." Today there is a historic marker honoring Captain Joseph Mulder and his battery on the Princeton battle site. With great skill and bravery, Captain Mulder directed intense and accurate fire from the American guns, which prevented the British forces from advancing across the field, says the marker. Of course, his militiamen go nameless. One of the soldiers who witnessed the battle was artist James Peale, who painted the battle. He actually went back a couple of days later so that he could get the scenery just right, get the fence just right. But one of these guys ought to be our Mr. Applegate. When the battle was over, General Washington placed the captain and 17 men, including Applegate, with 1 cannon. Their orders were to not leave until the enemy came in sight, and they fired 3 rounds. It was a tactic to slow British progress. Then the whole American army marched away, leaving 17 to fight the whole 12,000 troop British army, only after they came in sight. When the captain left to go with General Washington, the sergeant, he would say, in Applegate's words, "Not for the captain and not for George Washington neither. The sergeant said he had fought that morning with anyone in the field and he would do it again, but to stand and be slaughtered, he would not." As soon as the captain was out of sight, the sergeant hitched the horse up to the cannon and off they went following the army. He was a wise man. They caught up with the army and joined in them, marching until dark, sleeping in the woods. They quartered at Morristown until dismissed. In his statement written for his pension, he says, "I never refused to turn out every time I was called, from the first tour to the last. volunteered when I was not called on. Given by my hand, April 30th, 1833, Zebulon Applegate. He made his way from New Jersey to Kentucky, finally to Ohio Township, Clermont County, maybe as early as 1803. He is said to be buried in a New Richmond cemetery, but I haven't been able to find him. Well, a lesson in piracy. Privateers. During the American Revolution, privateers were pirates, but they had a permit, and they were heroes, and here's why. In the beginning of the war, the Americans had scant armed services and were now at war with the mightiest military on earth. In the beginning of the war, the Continental Navy, officially established by the Continental Congress, October 13, 1775, was started with 0 ships. And they were now at war with the mightiest naval power on earth. Late in 1775, the new country did purchase 4 merchant ships and converted them to warships. Some individual states operated their own fleets with a few boats, to be sure, but the states were protecting their own shores and waterways with those. Over the whole war, the Continental Navy had about 65 total ships, mostly converted merchant ships. The most they ever had on the water at one time was 27. Consequently, the Continental Congress authorized legalizing pirates, officially known as privateers, to augment the United States Navy. But the piracy had rules. First, the pirate wannabe needed a letter of marque. A letter of marque granted a private citizen the legal right to attack enemy vessels. The pirate ship owner had to pay a bond to Congress to ensure that they had good behavior. Captured enemy boats were referred to as prizes. There was a prize system. Prizes and their cargo were brought to port where they were auctioned off in a specialized admiralty court. The profits from these prizes were then split between the government, the ship's owners, and the crew. Many times it was the American government doing the bidding at the auction on gunpowder, armaments, cloth, sugar, etc. for use of their poorly supplied armed services. Over the course of the thousand privately armed privateers, 2,000, took to the seas carrying far more cannons and sailors than the official Navy. So on the cheap, the Continental Congress achieved a decentralized, privately funded Navy. Privateers captured desperately needed wartime supplies. How successful were they? They were darn successful. Privateers seized or destroyed 1,600 plus merchant and supply ships, dealing a massive blow to the British economy in addition to hindering their ability to resupply their troops. The good news for the privateers, many got exceedingly wealthy. The crews of these boats got a split of the prize. They could make more money in a month than the Navy sailors got in a year. The bad news, it was war. Their boats were also captured or sunk. If captured, the crews were not always treated like they were prisoners of war and held until exchanged. They could be treated as criminals and thieves. Privateers were absolutely as valuable in the war as any veteran. Like a veteran, they traded cannonballs with the enemy and they risked their lives, but Revolutionary War pensions were not available to the privateers. Clermont County became home to some of these privateers. John Dennis, according to his pension app, John Dennis turned out to be a really interesting bit part player throughout the Revolutionary War. He joined a New Jersey troop in 1776 as a 16-year-old. His service was near the seacoast most of the time. Early on, he does not include dates. Repeatedly, he says he doesn't remember. One of his neighbors he calls it Gloucester, it's actually Gloucester County, New Jersey, turned Tory and tried to enlist young John to join up with the British. On a ruse, John got himself admitted into the British encampment, supposedly to search for his father's stolen gun. While there, he overheard the British officers were planning to attend a frolic that very evening. He hurried back to the Patriot side and told his officer. Wanting to take advantage of an unexpected opportunity, the decision was made to attack the British during their party that very night, and a 150-man force was quickly rounded up to surprise the frolic. The British surrendered. 60 men were taken prisoner and later exchanged in a prisoner swap. That's just one incident among several that he related. About 1 week every month, John was assigned to guard duty at Fort Mifflin on the Delaware River. While he was away from the fort one day, he saw a British brig flying British colors coming up the river toward the fort. John ran to the fort to tell them what was coming round the bend. At the fort, they hurried to take down the American flag, ran up a British flag. The British brig came within sight of the fort, dropped anchor. From the brig, the pilot and the officers came to shore in rowboats. The fort then took down the British flag, ran up the American flag, told them they were arrested. His service ended, but before the war ended, so John Dennis joined up with the privateer, the Rattlesnake. It was on the Rattlesnake where he was actually wounded in a battle with a British 10-gun sloop of war. The only picture I could find of it was in a model box. 10 men were actually killed on board the privateer during the biggest battle he found himself in during the entire war. The British succeeded in capturing her. He thinks he moved from Gloucester County, New Jersey to Clermont County at Williamsburg about 1805. He moved to New Richmond in 1822, Monroe Township, 1824, lived there to his death in 1850. We have not found his grave. Here's why. Owners Viola Reese and Carolyn Fridman, granddaughters of Franklin Fridman, who bought the land in 1839. Their address is Route 2. It's located in an almost inaccessible spot. To get there, go as far as you can drive back Boat Run Road in Monroe Township. Go past 2 houses, ford a creek. About the distance of 1 city block past the creek, there's a gap in an old stone fence. It's about another block from the gap to the steep wooded cliff where he's buried. We tried to mark the spot with a white rag tied to an overhanging wild cherry tree with a huge wild grapevine growing in it. The stone is down and broken, very hard to find, and the only one in the plot. I haven't found that one yet. I think I need a guide dog or something. Jonathan Coffin Rathbone, privateer, and proud of it. This is from his journals and stories he told his grandson. His grandson wrote this up. So born in 1764, Jonathan Rathbone spent his early years growing up on Nantucket. When the death of his mother when he was 7, his care was turned over to an uncle, for whom he had been named Jonathan Coffin, a sea captain. Living on Nantucket, raised by a sea captain, he made his first voyage at age 11, sailing with his uncle to West Indies. This was 1776. What could go wrong? At this time, England controlled the Atlantic shipping lanes. Captain Coffin's ship was captured off Santa Cruz by a British privateer. Young Jonathan, his uncle, and the whole crew spent a month in a Virgin Islands prison. Once released, they made their way back to St. Augustine, Florida, where Uncle Jonathan obtained command of an 8-gun schooner bound for North Carolina. They soon found themselves targeted by a well-armed British frigate. Captain Jonathan tried to bring the boat in close to shore where he hoped the big British ship couldn't follow. Didn't work. The British ship dropped anchor and opened a broadside fire. Battle lasted 2 hours before the Americans, mindful of their recent stint in the slammer, jumped overboard and swam for land. They had to trudge overland to find another home, another way home. Finally, home on Nantucket, the talk of the island was about fortunes being made by privateers. Young Jonathan liked the sound of that. In 1777, when he was 13, he headed for Boston, jumped on a brig named the Speedwell, a well-known privateer. Setting sail for the island of Martinique, they took 2 prizes on the return passage. One prize was the 16-gun brigantine, the Freemason, which was actually an American ship recently captured by a British privateer. The other was a British merchant ship called the Fame. She was laden with rum. In 1778, Jonathan headed home again to Nantucket, only to find his island occupied by the British, so he spent winter elsewhere. In Boston, 1779, he again joined up with his uncle, who captained a merchant schooner heading for the West Indies. They had the same luck as before. For the rest of the war, life was sail, get captured, spend time in prison, be released in a prisoner swap, find another boat, start the cycle over. At 15, he was promoted to midshipman. At 17, he had to escape from a British prison ship, the Vulture, a hellhole anchored in the Hudson River. After the war, he continued his seafaring ways until the War of 1812 started heating up, and the British largely closed the entire eastern seaboard to trade. He thought life inland might be worth a try. From Nantucket to Pittsburgh to Cincinnati to Clermont County, he purchased 238 acres in Ohio Township, had a log home built, lived out his days clearing land and farming. Harder work, but fewer cannonballs. He died September 15th, 1836. He's buried in a beautiful cemetery behind the Lindale Baptist Church next to his wife and daughter. For country. Misspelled. Last guy. I promise. Joseph Shaler. By 1775, yeah, that's Shaler. Suspicion and hostility were running hot from Boston to Philadelphia to Connecticut to New York to New Jersey before the war broke out. Preparations were needed to be made, munitions stored, plans put in place. A meeting of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress was scheduled for April 19th, 1775 in Concord. But it was learned on April 18th that the British were marching from Boston through Lexington into Concord to disrupt the meeting, arrest the leaders, seize the stockpile of weapons and gunpowder. But the Americans, knowing tensions were high, had a plan of action in place if that happened. You'll have heard of Paul Revere. Quickly, he put 2 signal lanterns in the North Church belfry. He and William Dawes galloped on down the road to warn John Hancock and Samuel Adams to go into hiding. They were implementing the prearranged plan to alert a series of alarm riders who in turn would call on the nearby militia to turn out. The British were marching 800 troops toward Lexington, Massachusetts. Nearly there by 4 a.m. on April 19th, it became obvious to the British that the colonial militia were assembling throughout the countryside. They sent an urgent request for reinforcements. Soon 1,000 more Englishmen were leaving Boston and heading for Lexington. Oops, I hit the button a little too fast, sorry. As dawn broke, 77 militiamen were assembled on the Lexington town green. The British commander ordered them to disperse. 77 versus 800. The militiamen were beginning to back away when a shot rang out. All hell broke loose and the war was on. 8 American militiamen were killed, 10 wounded. With news of the 2nd British Brigade coming to support the 1st, the Massachusetts Committee of Safety, I like that, realized help would be needed from the colonial militia. Immediately, the following letter was dispatched, most of it. To all friends of the American liberty, be it known that this morning before break of day, a brigade consisting of about 1,000 to 1,200, of course they were aiming their guns at you, it probably looked like more of them, landed at Phipps Farm at Cambridge and marched to Lexington, where they found a company of our colonial militia in arms, upon whom they fired without any provocation and killed 6 men, wounded 4. By a message from Boston, we find another brigade are now on the march, supposed to be about 1,000. The bearer, Israel Bissell, is charged to alarm the countryside to Connecticut, and all persons are desired to furnish him with fresh horses as they be needed. I have spoken with several persons who have seen the dead and wounded. Pray let the delegates from this county to Connecticut see this. So the alarm was called. And this is where Joseph Shaler came in. My initial findings looking up Joseph Shaler was that he was with the militiamen there at Concord. And I said that. I said he was there at the first shot, and I have found out, you find out lots of errors as time goes on. He was not there, but he enlisted in the 1776 in the Connecticut line until the end of war. Okay, there. The Lexington alarm. Down here we have Joseph Shaler. That's how he started his career. In response to the first gunshot of the war, he enlisted until, quote-unquote, end the war. He was an ensign in the Battle of White Plains and the Battle of Fort Washington, both brutal defeats for Washington's forces. In July 1779, General Washington organized a corps of light troops, and those were the guys who could go fast. They didn't carry loads of supplies with them, they went fast. They were the light troops, under Brigadier General Anthony Wayne, to serve at the front and to attempt the recapture of Stony Point on the Hudson. This corps was composed of picked men from all the regiments under Washington's immediate command. Yeah, Fort Washington. Did not go well. And this was his letter home after the Battle of Fort Washington. Once more from a land of woe and trouble, I write to inform you through the goodness of God, I am in the land of the living encircled with friends. Well, how shall I speak of it? Numbers of friends, relations, and acquaintances are laid beneath the clouds of the valley. But I must tell you that Saturday there was an engagement on York Island when almost all the men on the island were either taken or killed, which was not less than 2,500. So it didn't go well. But now we're on the Battle of Stony Point. The corps was composed of picked men from all regiments under Washington's immediate command. The assault was at midnight for the element of surprise. The men were commanded not to even load their muskets, to use bayonets only. It was crazy barbaric and a dramatic attack that captured the heavily fortified outpost. The Americans gained needed supplies and a morale boost. General Anthony Wayne gained a new nickname. He was thereafter called Mad Anthony. After the American victory in the war, Joseph Shaler enlisted back into the regular army and he was promoted to captain. So this is the only guy I have written about with a military career past peace of the Revolutionary War. By 1792, he was stationed in Fort Jefferson. Hello, Kelly!
Hi.
In present-day Darke County, Ohio. It was the northernmost forward supply depot, deep in hostile indigenous territory. It was under constant attack since St. Clair's defeat in November 1791. The next captain to command Fort Jefferson after Shaler was scalped just outside the fort's perimeters. Here's a letter home from him in 1792. My dear children, before this can reach you, the melancholy news of the death of your brother will have been announced most likely. But if not, forbear a tear at the relation of it. That sacrifice is already paid. If tears can suffice, I have shed enough. My rising hope, the expectation of my future happiness, and one in whom was centered the hope and expectation of the family, numbered with the dead. He was killed by 2 warrior Shawnees within call of the garrison. I then commanded on the 11th of February. I was at the same time attacked in the most furious manner by 2 others who hid themselves behind a log. They first discharged their pieces and then rushed upon us in the most savage manner imaginable. He, endeavoring to defend me, lost his life. I, endeavoring to defend him, got myself into such a situation that I despaired of living. for both of us had discharged our pieces without much effect. We both had rifles without bayonets. The savages rushed on us with tomahawk and arrows, which prevented us from reloading. I was therefore obliged to attack one with my fists, while another with his tomahawk was within a breath of taking my life. However, I escaped with having an arrow shot halfway through my body. The wound I thought would bring on my dissolution, but thank God I am recovered and out of danger. Joseph was brought into the garrison, and the next day was buried with military honors. Let it suffice to say, he lived as much beloved and died as much lamented by his acquaintances as ever a youth did. Let this be your consolation, as it is mine, that he was taken in mercy from a world of woe to scenes of everlasting bliss. He was 15 years old. After burying his son, the elder Joseph Shaler was relieved of his command and court-martialed for leaving the garrison. The government. And while that has nothing to do with the Revolutionary War, it reflects the sacrifice Joseph Shaler gave to the U.S. military, as many did. Major Joseph Shaler resigned 1797 after 22 years in uniform. In 1802, he bought property in Clermont County. He called it a plantation at the mouth of what is now known as Shaler Run into the East Fork of the Little Miami. And he loved it here. He tried to entice his children to leave Connecticut and come to Ohio, the finest country in the world. In his will, he writes, I have served my country more than 38 years with applause and have 3 times received the thanks of the immortal Washington at the head of the regiment, and I die almost a beggar. In the letter to his children still back home in Connecticut in 1814, he says, the best part of my days being sacrificed, as I thought, for the good of the country, without any just numeration for my services, it was impossible to consolidate much property, except that we estimate our independence as its real value and allow me my share of contributing to the result of the great blessing. Then have I bequeathed to you and yours an estate worth millions. I can't find his grave either. It says he's on a terrace below his property, and you know where the Shaler Run empties into the East Fork, and you can see the train tracks are right there, and the weeds go straight up the hill, and if there's a terrace up there, I can't see it, but somebody has sent me a map that sort of shows where there's a terrace, and maybe when the ticks are gone and the poison ivy's down, I'll give it a go. I think I need a machete and a train track. So the latest on the Clermont County Genealogical Society's website, you can see everybody that we have confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt to be Revolutionary War veterans there. So many sources. I know there's double that many sources. I loved finding the artwork. That was fun. Come September, geez, I thought the date was on here. Wait a minute. September 15th, 10:30 a.m., the Genealogical Society is going to be dedicating that monument, mocked up monument, to the Revolutionary War veterans of Clermont County. It's going to be at Veterans Memorial Park, which is entirely appropriate, where there is lights to keep things lit and security, and we don't need to worry about somebody bumping it off. There will be cannons. There will be the SAR. There will be speakers, and also me. So, I think that's the last thing I got. That's the last thing I got. My location is in luck. Thank you for coming. Anybody got questions? Yeah. You always do, don't you?
I do. How accurate are the numbers when they talked about 850 people marching here, 2,000 crossing the river?
I think they're around accurate.
Okay.
because I've gone through sources and then other sources and then other sources, and I find the number somewhat different from place to place. I mean, even that letter there from Concord says different numbers than history has reported there to be. So they're around accurate.
That's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, they're not wildly wrong anyway, they're around accurate. But a couple of occasions they were down to the 822 prisoners. Well, okay, 822 prisoners. Sounds good to me. Somebody counted them.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe their names are on a list someplace. Yeah, it's a good question. Sometimes you just have to go with it. That was an easy question. Anybody got a hard one? I'm still looking for, in Williamsburg, I'm still looking for Absalom Smith. I know he's in your cemetery, but whereas everybody else's grave stands up and you can see it from a distance, his lies flat. And I can't, without going through the whole cemetery, I have not been able to find Absalom Smith, and I've not been able to find one other that really should be there. His family's there, they all have the same shaped tombstone, and I can't find him. So I'm still on the hunt for a lot of these veterans. There was a deadline to get them entered into the Ohio list of May 15th. So initially they were saying the deadline was December 31st. So my New Year's Eve was spent falling down hills of old cemeteries and out of the way places because I thought that was the deadline. It wasn't. They extended it. But now they're saying, no, you can still send in. So I've been out on the hunt since. I've been sending just last week, another one. So it's my thing. I love old cemeteries. I love these guys. I've gotten quite fond of them. The more I learn about them, the more interesting they are to me. Yes, ma'am.
I have enjoyed hearing you talk before about how you did this research and how complicated things can be with the counties and how somebody lived here but died or the
Exactly.
county line changed or something.
Oh, all of that. And that's the talk I started to do. I've actually got the beginning of that talk someplace, and I went, oh, this is boring. These guys are so much more interesting than that. But there are so many ways that made things difficult, so many ways that things could go wrong. Especially these German names. They were spelled 35 different ways. So first you had to decide if you had 35 different people. Or if it was just one guy with, people wrote down his name as they heard. And they heard it differently. With a German accent, it sounds different. So what we know in Clermont County is Trees, T-R-E-E-S. I mean, there's Ironton Trees Road, there's people named Trees. Well, that name as it came over on the boat was Dries, D-R-I-E-S-S. So that makes it really hard to, when you list things alphabetically, that doesn't happen. We've got McGrew. He spells on his tombstone M-E-G-R-E-W. I've seen it McCrew, M-C-C-R-U, lots of different spelling issues because they weren't literate people. There's so many of these guys signed these papers with their mark. They could not read or write. So they say their name is John McGrew. It's up to whoever's got the pen to decide how it's spelled. Yes, there were lots of men that lived here a long time. Now, the list on the Genealogical Society's website includes everybody that spent the night in Clermont County, one way or the other. I was just trying to find graves, so for my purposes, if they then went with their kids after living in Clermont County for 30 years and they wound up buried in Illinois, off my list. But the Genealogical Society considers them, and they are. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not, but they're Clermont Countyans, and they're on their list. Several, if not many, of our veterans lived in what was Clermont County at the time, and then they divvied up in 1817 between Clermont and Brown County. So again, from my list, they're gone. But it was Clermont County, so they're on the Genealogical Society's list. So we're on different missions, but we're together. So, but so many ways this has been an interesting hunt. We find the SAR has so many mistakes. Bless their hearts. And it has a lot of times to do with spelling, but sometimes it has to do with, he's born in 1781. I don't think he's a Revolutionary War veteran. And the like that are really obvious.
Youngest soldier ever.
Huh?
Youngest soldier ever.
In the womb. Anyway, and God, there's a story I would love to be able to confirm, and it's just not confirmable, about the wife of a veteran who family lore is that she ran errands for George Washington. She was a messenger. And you know that's not going to have been written down. And if you look back on her and you see when her children were born, through the whole war, she's having babies after babies after babies. Was she really running the errands for George Washington? I don't know. We just can't, we cannot confirm that. We cannot confirm that. It's a lovely story. I would love to be able to find proof of that. She ran slowly. Well, maybe she ran fast. Oh my God, it's coming. I don't know. Great place to hide a secret. You know, who's gonna look? So there's just loads of legends we're still tracking down. We have a William Jones. We have a John Smith. We have all the people named John. I am all for setting a law against naming a child John again as long as he lives. John Weaver. Do you know how many John Weavers were in the Revolutionary War? We've got one. He's listed by the SAR as a veteran. There's a million John Weavers. We can't confirm which one. There's a John Ferry. Says he is a Revolutionary War veteran. There are many places that his name could have been registered as a Revolutionary War veteran. If he had applied for a pension, if he'd have registered as he got here, there are lists of people we know for a fact are. John Ferry is not on any of those lists, but he is said to have fought in Pennsylvania under John Slaymaker. So you get under Slaymaker and you look, yes, there is a John Ferry fought for John Slaymaker. There are several Slaymakers who were officers from the same county in Pennsylvania, and there are several John Ferrys who are from the same county in Pennsylvania whose birthdays may be a couple of years apart, which makes it difficult to say, well, it's this one, not that one. One was a lieutenant, and our John Ferry would have been 16, so we thought, that's probably not it. So we're still filtering out. But there's 6 other places in the United States who claim that particular John Ferry who fought for John Slaymaker. So one of us is right. We have to confirm it. I've been to his gravesite. It was behind the barn. The guy didn't even want us on his property, but his daughter said it was okay. Had a guide down the hill, across the creek, up the hill. What is it with the creeks and the hills? Out into the woods, and they not known, it would never have been found. It had been used in the 50s as a hog farm, this little cemetery. The fence around the little cemetery was to keep the hogs, but if the fence broke, they just pulled up a monument and stuck it in the hole. That's the respect with which that cemetery was treated. So I've been to that cemetery. The stone is busted. There's enough of a birth date left on the piece of the stone we can find to confirm that it's him. We know his birth date and his death date, but his name is missing. So we've been at it. It's been, I love it. Somebody says, I got this old cemetery, you wanna go? Yes, I do. It's my thing. Old monuments, old decorations, old symbolism, I'm all for it. You have the date of the open doors. Is it till the 20th?
September 20th,
Okay, so it is Sunday.
2 to 4.
2 to 4, got it, okay. I said September, and amongst all my stuff, I didn't have it written down, so.
Okay.
Good, thank you. Anything else? No, then you're free to go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're gonna get you a nicer lectern next time. I have the same problem. Tall people and